We should have turned back when the gas station attendant asked where we were headed. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like he already knew the answer and didn't like it. Appalachian Trail, Mark told him too casually, leaning against the counter with a grin that only worked on people who didn't know him well. Somewhere around Virginia. We're meeting a trailhead near McAfee Knob. The man paused mid-scan, a bottle of water hovering over the counter. His eyes moved up. Not toward Mark, toward the three of us standing behind him. Me, Daniel, technically, though nobody had called me that since college. Ethan, quiet as always, scrolling through his phone like he wasn't part of the conversation. And Josh, who looked like he hadn't slept properly in a week, but kept insisting he was fine. "Lot of woods out there," the man finally said. His voice was flat, measured, without any warmth in it. Mark chuckled. "That's kind of the point." The man didn't smile back. We laughed it off when we got back in the car. We always did that. Turned things into jokes when they felt slightly off. It was kind of our thing. That's probably why we made it as far as we did. That, and because the whole trip had been Mark's idea. It started 3 weeks earlier in his apartment. Beer bottles on the table, a football game playing in the background, and that restless energy that only shows up when everyone's pretending they're not stuck. "We should do something real," Mark had said, leaning forward like he was about to pitch a startup idea. "Not just this. Not just drinking every weekend and talking about doing things." Josh snorted. "You mean like when you said we'd start going to the gym last year?" "This is different," Mark insisted. "Something big. Something we actually remember." Ethan didn't even look up. "Define big." Mark grinned. "We go hiking. Appalachian Trail." That got my attention. Not because I loved hiking, but because I knew the name. Everyone did. It wasn't just a trail. Over 2,000 miles stretching from Georgia to Maine through mountains and forests where you could walk for days without seeing another person. "That's not a weekend thing," I said. "That's like months." "We don't do the whole thing," Mark replied quickly. "Just a section. Virginia's supposed to be one of the best parts. McAfee Knob, Tinker Cliffs. Those views you always see online, that's where they are." Josh leaned back, arms crossed. "So we go play hikers for a couple of days and come back?" "Exactly." Ethan finally looked up. "No signal?" Mark shrugged. "Probably not much." Ethan thought about that for a second, then nodded. That should have been my first warning sign. We planned it fast. Too fast. Mark handled the route, downloaded maps, picked the trailhead, and talked about elevation like he knew what he was doing. Ethan sorted the gear and made a checklist that looked far too professional for a 2-day hike. Josh showed up. That was about it. He said he needed the break. Didn't say from what. And me? I just didn't want to be the one who said no. The truth is, we hadn't done anything together in a long time. Not like this. Life had started pulling us in different directions. Jobs, responsibilities, whatever you want to call the things that make you forget who you were 5 years ago. This felt like grabbing onto something before it slipped away completely, so I went along with it. The drive took longer than expected. By the time we crossed into Virginia, the sky had already shifted to that dull gray that comes before evening, when everything feels a little heavier than it should. The highway narrowed. Then the towns did too. At some point, the GPS stopped feeling reliable. It kept recalculating, sending us down smaller and smaller roads until we were cutting through stretches of forest that looked completely untouched. No houses, no lights. Just trees, tall and dense, closing in on both sides of the road. "You sure this is right?" I asked. Mark glanced at his phone. "It's a back route." "It doesn't feel like a route," Josh muttered from the back seat. Ethan said nothing. He'd stopped scrolling. The deeper we pushed, the quieter it became. Not just inside the car, outside too. No distant traffic, no signs of life. just the low hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel when the asphalt disappeared entirely beneath our wheels. We passed a wooden sign at some point, half-rotted, barely readable. Appalachian Trail access 2 miles. "That's us," Mark said. Nobody responded. The road ended without warning. One minute we were pushing through trees, and the next it opened up into a small clearing with room for maybe 4 or 5 cars. Ours was the only one there. Mark killed the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Josh let out a low whistle. "Well, this is it." I stepped out first. The air hit differently than I expected, cooler than it should have been for that time of year, carrying that damp, earthy smell you only get deep in the woods. Petrichor, old moss, and something faintly bitter underneath it all, like wet bark and cold stone. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't welcoming either. Ahead of us, the trail began almost immediately. A narrow path cutting through thick forest marked by faded white blazes on the tree trunks. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. "Doesn't look like much," I said. "It's not supposed to," Mark replied, pulling his pack from the trunk. "That's the point. It's real." I looked past the trail, deeper into the forest. The trees were taller than I expected. Not just tall. Old. The kind that block out the sky even when you tilt your head all the way back. Oak, hickory, scattered pines, and something else I couldn't quite name. The ground dipped and rose in uneven waves, hinting at the mountains beyond. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear water. A creek threading its way through the valley below, barely audible. And above it all, the outline of the Blue Ridge Mountains stretched across the horizon, dark against the fading light. Beautiful, in a way, but there was something else. Something that didn't sit right. Ethan stepped up beside me. "You feel that?" I hesitated. "Feel what?" He looked at the trees, then back at the trail. "Like we're not supposed to be here?" Mark laughed from behind us. "Yeah, that's called being out of your comfort zone." Ethan didn't laugh. We had already decided 2 things before we reached that trail. The first was that we were hiking at night. The second was that we were going to scare Mark. He just didn't know it. The night hiking idea came from him like most things did. During the planning week, Mark dropped it into the group chat like it was obvious. "We're not wasting the night sleeping," he wrote. "We hike after dark." Josh pushed back immediately. "Why would we do that?" "Because it's better," Mark said. "Cooler air, no crowds, a completely different experience. You actually feel the forest." Ethan didn't argue. He just asked practical questions about headlamps, trail visibility, and wildlife. Mark had an answer for everything. We agreed, not because it made sense, but because Mark believed it did. The prank came later, a different conversation. Smaller, just the 3 of us without Mark. "He acts like nothing scares him," Josh said. "Like he's immune." "He kind of is," I said. Josh shook his head. "It just hasn't been scared properly." Ethan didn't smile. He looked at both of us and said, "We could do it." That was the moment it stopped being a joke. We built the idea quickly. "There's always elevation on those trails," Ethan said. "Hills, bends. We find a spot where visibility breaks. Like a small ridge," I added, "where you can't see the other side unless you go up." Josh nodded. "We act like we spotted something moving." Ethan continued, already working it through. He goes to investigate. We split before that. I stay closer to the ridge, behind a tree, close enough to see him when he reaches the top. He looked at us both. You 2 crossed to the other side of the trail, a little further down, staying behind cover. "You can see me, and I see you." "And Mark comes back down," Josh said, starting to smile. "And we're nowhere near where he left us," I finished. There was a pause, just long enough to register what we were actually planning. Then Josh said, "We need something visual." That was where the masks came in. Cheap white ones, blank faces, no expression at all. The kind that doesn't look frightening in a store, but looks completely wrong in the dark. We bought them 2 days before the trip. Said nothing to Mark. Just tucked them into our bags like they were nothing. By the time we arrived at the trailhead, everything was already decided. We weren't improvising. We were just waiting for night. The hike to the campsite was short. We didn't want to go too deep before dark. Just far enough to get away from the car, find a place to settle, and wait. The trail was easier to follow in daylight. White blazes on tree trunks, packed dirt underfoot, the occasional stretch of exposed rock. It felt like a path people used regularly. We found the clearing about 15 minutes in. Flat ground, space for tents, and signs that others had camped there before. Compressed earth, a rough fire ring, and a loose arrangement of stones around it. Setting up camp gave us something to do while we waited. Tents went up fast, packs got organized, food came out. Everything felt normal. Too normal considering what we had planned. Every now and then I'd catch Ethan's eye, or Josh's. No words. Just a quick look. A reminder. Mark had no idea. He was relaxed, comfortable, talking like this was just another trip to check off. At one point, he stood near the edge of the clearing, listening to the forest. "It changes at night," he said. "You'll see." Josh glanced at me. I already knew what he was thinking. "Yeah, you'll see too." We ate as the sun dropped. The light shifted from warm to dim, then from dim to something colder. Shadows stretched across the ground, climbed the trunks, and merged until the forest lost its shape. The temperature dropped with them. Not enough to be uncomfortable, just enough to notice. By the time we packed up again, the sky above the trees was already dark. No fire, no lingering. This was the part Mark had been waiting for. "All right," he said, tightening his straps. "Now it gets good." Josh smirked. "We'll see." Ethan clicked on his headlamp. The beam cut a clean line through the darkness ahead. I did the same. One by one, small cones of light formed in front of us, and everything beyond them disappeared. The forest at night was not the same place. The trail was still there, but it felt narrower, as if it had drawn inward since we last walked it. The trees pressed closer, taller. The moon was somewhere above the canopy, but it barely reached us. Only thin, broken streaks of pale light fell through the branches, just enough to remind you how dark it actually was. And the quiet was the first thing that felt wrong. During the day, there had been sound, subtle but constant. Now there was nothing. No insects, no birds, no distant rustling in the underbrush. Only our footsteps, and even those seemed too sharp, too loud, like they didn't belong in that place. "You hear that?" I said quietly. "Hear what?" Mark asked. "Exactly." He exhaled through his nose. "You guys are already starting." Josh laughed under his breath, but it came out thinner than usual. Ethan said nothing. He was scanning the trees. We walked deeper, further from the clearing and further from anything familiar, until the trail began to rise. I recognized the spot immediately. The slight curve, the incline, and just off to the side, the ridge. It looked different at night. Larger, darker, like the top of it was pulling in what little moonlight remained and giving none of it back. Ethan slowed just slightly. That was enough. Josh caught it, and so did I. Josh stopped first. "What was that?" he said. Mark turned. Josh didn't answer right away. He was staring up at the ridge, focused, like he was tracking something through the dark. "I thought I saw something up there," he said. I followed his gaze. "Something moved," I added after a pause. Mark looked between us, then at Ethan. Ethan gave a single, steady nod. Mark turned back toward the ridge. The darkness up there had a different weight to it. Still and heavy in a way the rest of the forest wasn't. "You're messing with me," he said. But it didn't carry the confidence it usually did. "We're not," Josh said quietly. A long pause opened between us. Mark looked back down the trail, then up at the ridge, then at each of us in turn. "Probably just an animal," he muttered. Then go check, Josh said. A shorter pause this time. Mark shook his head like he was annoyed more than anything else. He stepped off the trail, picked up a thick fallen branch from the ground, and tested the weight of it in his hand. Fine, he said. He started toward the ridge, slow and careful, his headlamp beam swaying with each step as he climbed the slope. The rest of the forest stayed completely still, completely silent. We watched him go, counting the distance, waiting. And just before he reached the top, Ethan moved. So did we. The moment Mark got close to the crest of the ridge, Ethan slipped off the trail to the right and disappeared behind a thick tree trunk just a few meters below the slope. Josh and I crossed to the opposite side, moving a little further down like we had rehearsed, keeping just enough distance to still see Ethan through the gaps in the trees. No talking, no wasted movement, just position. I looked back toward the ridge. Mark had reached the top. His headlamp was still on, but from where we stood, it was little more than a weak glow behind branches. He stood there for a moment, like he was looking at something on the other side. Then he stepped forward and disappeared behind the crest. We pulled the masks from our bags. The plastic felt colder than I expected, almost uncomfortably so against my palms. I slid mine on and adjusted it until my breathing steadied. Josh did the same beside me. Across the trail, I could barely make out Ethan's silhouette as he raised his mask into place. Then we turned off our headlamps. Instantly, the forest closed in around us. This wasn't the comfortable dark of a room with the curtains drawn. It was total and pressing, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The only remaining light came from the moon, thin and scattered, barely enough to separate shapes from the shadows behind them. We took our positions and waited. It didn't take long, maybe 20 seconds. First, there was movement. A shape reappearing at the top of the ridge, coming back down the slope, slow and careful, just like we expected. I shifted slightly to get a better angle. Across the trail, Ethan was locked in, his body tense and leaning forward. He wasn't watching the figure descending the slope. He was watching me, waiting for the signal. That was the plan. He jumps first, bursts out from behind the tree, starts the noise. Then Josh and I follow from the other side. Simple and clean. I raised my hand. Not yet. Let it get closer. The figure kept moving down, step by step. Then something made me go still. It was subtle at first. Just a feeling at the edge of awareness that something wasn't right. I leaned toward Josh. Look at him, I whispered. Josh narrowed his eyes. A few seconds passed. Something's weird, he muttered. The shape was wrong. Mark wasn't tall, but he wasn't slight either. This figure looked narrower, longer, like the proportions didn't match what I knew. And then I realized something else. His headlamp was off. A cold, tight feeling settled into my chest. Why is his light off? I whispered. Josh didn't answer. The figure kept coming. Closer to Ethan now. Still slow. Still completely silent. I pulled my mask off. I needed to see clearly. Josh did the same almost immediately. Across the trail, Ethan noticed. Even in the dark, I could read the confusion in the way he shifted. He made a small gesture with his hands as if to ask why. I raised one hand flat toward him. Stop. He went still, half crouched behind the tree, waiting. The figure moved closer. A few more steps, and then it passed through a narrow break in the canopy where moonlight actually reached the ground. A pale silver strip falling clean between the branches. And I saw it. My brain tried to correct it. Tried to reach for something familiar. Something that made sense. A deer. A trick of the light. Anything. But it didn't work. It was tall. Too tall. And impossibly thin. Its body stretched tightly over bone. Every movement angular and wrong. Its arms hung too low, swaying in a way that didn't match anything living I had ever seen. And rising from its skull, branching out wide and jagged and uneven, were antlers. For a split second, I thought a deer skeleton, something hollow and dead stumbling through the dark. But then it took another step, upright, on two legs, and that thought collapsed entirely. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the ground had moved. I snapped my head toward Ethan. He hadn't seen it yet. He was still watching me, still waiting, half crouched behind the tree with his mask in his hand and no idea what was coming toward him. Josh grabbed my arm. "Tell him," he whispered, panic bleeding through. I didn't trust my voice, so I waved, both arms hard and wide. "Run." Josh did the same beside me, faster and more urgent. Ethan hesitated for just a second, the way you do when your eyes are sending information your brain doesn't want to process. Then he looked at the figure, and I shouted. I didn't think. The sound just tore out of me. "That is not Mark. Run." The words ripped through the forest. All that heavy silence swallowed them the moment they landed. The creature stopped. Its head turned. Not toward Ethan, toward me. Even from that distance, I felt the shift in its attention, the way the air seemed to tighten. Like something had just decided what it wanted. Then it moved. Not walking anymore. It came down the rest of the slope in a lurching, wrong-angled burst, covering the ground faster than anything that thin should have been able to. Ethan didn't wait to see more. Something snapped in him and he ran, crashing straight through the undergrowth toward us, branches raking across his arms and face. Behind him, the creature followed, closing the distance faster than I wanted to believe. We didn't wait. The moment Ethan was close enough, we turned and ran back the way we came. No plan, no formation, just instinct and the narrow trail under our feet. The forest exploded with noise around us. Footsteps, cracking branches, leaves tearing under our boots. All that silence was gone, replaced by something worse, because now we knew we weren't alone in it, and whatever was behind us was keeping up. Branches hit our faces. Roots caught our feet. The trail we had followed so carefully on the way in became something else entirely, uneven and unreliable in the dark, barely there at all. "Stay on the trail," Ethan shouted, his voice already ragged from the pace. We didn't need to see it anymore. We could hear it. That was the part that got inside your head. It didn't follow us in a straight line the way an animal would. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, it moved wrong. There were moments where the sound came from directly behind us, close enough that I felt it in my chest. Then suddenly, it wasn't there. The crashing would shift to our left, then to our right, then vanish entirely before slamming back in again from behind. Like it couldn't hold a straight path, or didn't need the trail at all, or was doing something else entirely that I didn't have a name for. I glanced back once. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't following the path the way we were. It kept cutting into the forest, vanishing between the trunks, then reappearing closer, then gone again. Its movements were sharp and erratic, each stride slightly off in a way I couldn't quite pin down. Like something learning how to run in real time, calibrating with every step. "Don't look back," Josh yelled. Too late for that. My lungs were burning. Every breath felt too small, too shallow. But none of us slowed. None of us even suggested it. The trail dipped, curved, and climbed again. Familiar, but not in any way that felt reassuring. More like a memory you're trying to outrun. Then we hit the sharp bend. I recognized it immediately. A tight curve in the trail that wrapped around a cluster of rock and thick trunks, almost like a corner you couldn't see past until you were already inside it. We took it at full speed, nearly lost our footing and barely held it. Behind us, something crashed. Louder than before, and closer. Then silence. Not complete, but different. The crashing had stopped. The erratic movement through the trees had gone quiet. We kept running anyway. Not for a second did any of us consider stopping. Then it came. A sound I will not forget for as long as I live. It started low and rose fast, something between a scream and a sound no living creature should produce. Not human. not animal. Somewhere between the two, but stretched and distorted like it had been pulled apart and reassembled wrong. It rolled through the forest and kept going, long and sharp and furious. Then more movement. Not close. Further out, deeper in the trees, crashing away from us through the dark. It lost us, Ethan gasped. Don't stop, I said. We didn't. We ran until the ground leveled out, until the trees thinned just enough, until the darkness ahead lived open rather than closed, and then we saw it. The clearing. The car sitting exactly where we had left it, its outline just visible against the pale edge of the night sky. I don't remember who reached it first. I just remember the feeling of the door handle in my hand, cold and real and solid, and the way we all threw ourselves inside and slammed the doors hard enough to shake the whole frame. Keys. Where are the keys? Josh said, his voice climbing. I have them, Ethan said, already pulling them from his pocket, his hands trembling as he shoved the key into the ignition. The engine didn't catch right away. For 1 second, nothing happened. Just the tick of the key in the forest pressing in through every window. Then it turned over. The engine roared and the headlights cut across the clearing, flooding the tree line in flat white light. But we didn't move. Not yet. We sat there breathing hard, watching every tree at the edge of the forest. Every shadow looked like it could shift. Every gap between the trunks looked like something might step out of it. Then Josh said it. Where's Mark? That landed on all of us at the same moment. Silence. We hadn't seen him. Not since he went over the ridge. He had never come back down. Not on our side, anyway. We're not leaving him, Ethan said. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Nobody argued. So we waited. Engine running, headlights on, eyes fixed on the tree line. Every second stretched longer than it should have. Every movement in the leaves made my heart kick hard against my ribs. The forest didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like something paying attention. Then movement. All three of us saw it at the same time. A shape at the edge of the clearing running, coming out of the trees and heading straight for us. Josh swore under his breath. Drive. Wait, Ethan said. The shape kept coming. Into the headlights. Into the light. And then we saw his face. Mark. He stumbled into the clearing, breathing in hard, ragged pulls, barely slowing as he reached the car. We threw the door open before he got there. He practically fell inside. Drive, he shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed it into gear and hit the accelerator. The car lurched forward, gravel spraying out behind the tires, and then we were on the road, the trees rushing past on both sides. None of us spoke for the first few minutes. Just the sound of breathing and the engine and the road beneath us, waiting for something to follow, watching the mirrors. Nothing did. The road stretched ahead, dark but solid, real, not like the trail. After a while, Mark finally spoke. He was still catching his breath. I saw it. Nobody said anything. We let him go at his own pace. I got to the top of the ridge, he said. I thought it was you guys at first. Thought maybe you'd run ahead or something to mess with me. He shook his head. But then I saw it coming up from the other side. My stomach tightened. I thought it had already spotted me, he continued. So I ran. Not back toward you. Into the forest. I figured if it followed me, it wouldn't lead it to where you were. Nobody said anything. The road hummed beneath us. I ran for a while, he added. Didn't hear anything behind me after a bit, so I slowed down and started working my way back. He looked at us. But when I got to the trail, you weren't there. We ran, Josh said quietly. Mark nodded. I figured. So I kept going back to the car, he said. Hoped you'd do the same. Silence settled over all of us again. The trees thinned as we drove further away. The mountains faded somewhere behind us in the dark. The forest stayed where it was. None of us looked back. We never talked about going back either. Not once. Not even as a joke. Because whatever we saw out there was real. We all saw it, we all heard it, and we all felt it in the way that things leave a mark on you.